I don't want to be here this morning. You don't want me to be here this morning. But here we are again. The cases across the country are spiking massively. We are facing a winter that's going to drive people inside more and more. And we're really at risk of seeing caseloads go up and hospitals get overwhelmed and more loved ones dying. So we need to do everything we can right now to slow the spread of COVID-19, to stop this spike in its tracks. If you were planning to see friends this weekend, maybe don't. If there was a birthday party or a gathering for dinner you were thinking about doing, don't do it. We're in a moment right now, or even with all the sacrifices I know Canadians have been making over these past 10 months, we are now going to have to really tighten up once again. This is frustrating because I know we've all heard stories of people who've thrown up their hands and are not doing their part anymore. People who have stopped wearing masks or people who are going out more than they should. And it's tempting for all of us to say, okay, well, maybe I can loosen up a bit more too. But the reality is, we need to go in the opposite direction. If there are people out there not following the rules when we know we need to, well, then those of us who need to are going to have to do even more. Because it's the future of our country. It's the future of our children. It's the future of our loved ones and our seniors. It's our economy. It's our businesses. It's everything all together. We're going to need to have to do this for another few weeks, for another few months, and we can begin to see the other side of this. We can do this. We've done it before. We know what to do. We understand this virus much better than before. We need to reduce our contacts. We need to do it right now. Je suis pas ici parce que ça me tente de l'être. Et je sais que ça vous tente pas de me voir ici, devant ma maison, encore une fois, en train de dire, il va falloir qu'on fasse des sacrifices, mais c'est exactement où on en est rendu. On est en train de voir une montée fulgurante des cas, ici au Canada, partout au Canada, comme on le voit partout à travers le monde. Et nous savons ce que nous devons faire. Nous devons de suivre les consignes de la santé publique. Nous devons de réduire nos contacts, de faire des choix judicieux, attentifs, de ne pas se rassembler avec des amis, de ne pas fêter des anniversaires, de rester virtuel, de rester à la maison le plus possible. On est rendu au moment où on va devoir, encore une fois, se resserrer pendant quelques semaines pour bloquer, pour arrêter cette éclosion de la COVID-19. Et si on agit bien pour les semaines à venir, ben, ça va peut-être être un peu plus facile pour les prochains mois. Mais je vais vous dire la vérité, les prochains mois vont être difficiles. On s'en va à l'hiver. On va être encore plus à l'intérieur. On va être encore plus limité. La COVID-19 va pouvoir se propager plus facilement à l'intérieur. Et donc, il va falloir qu'on fasse attention. Ça fait 10 mois qu'on le fait, que les gens font les bonnes choses, qu'on a démontré qu'on peut contrôler ce virus. Et on est rendu maintenant dans un moment où il va falloir qu'on le fasse encore une fois et encore plus que ce qu'on faisait dans les semaines passées. Et c'est frustrant parce que on entend des histoires de ceux qui ne sont pas en train de suivre les consignes, qui se mettent à risque, qui nous mettent tous à risque. Et même si ça nous tente de faire comme eux, on sait qu'on ne peut pas. Que ceux d'entre nous qui suivent les consignes vont devoir en faire encore plus. Et c'est pas juste. C'est pas juste pour personne. Mais on sait ce qu'il faut faire. On sait que c'est le moment maintenant de se rassembler et de faire ce qu'on a pu faire au printemps. We need to do what we're doing to protect jobs, to support businesses, and to keep Canadians safe. We need to work together, all of us, as a team. Yesterday, I had a briefing with Dr. Tam, Dr. New, Minister Haidu, and the leaders of the opposition to discuss the current situation. All orders of government must come together to stop the spread of this virus. This was something I discussed last week with the premiers at our 21st virtual First Ministers meeting since the pandemic began. Across the country, we're seeing premiers and mayors making very tough choices to go into further shutdowns. And I know how hard that is, and I want them to know that they have my support, our support as a federal government. The best way to protect the economy is to get the virus under control. Doing things to protect people's health is the best way to minimize lasting damage to the economy. You know, in the beginning, we thought of this as a contradiction, that the things we need to do to keep us safe are things that are actually hurting the economy. That was how we framed that first wave of shutdowns. But we actually now know better from seeing what's happened around the world, from seeing how Canadians have made it through that first wave and through this second wave that's ongoing. Doing the things that protect our health are actually the best things to do to protect our economy. Going into lockdown and supporting businesses while we're in that lockdown is a better way of ensuring their success in a few months, in a few years, than trying to tough through a virus that is running around unchecked. We know that we need to be there for each other, and the federal government is going to continue to be there to help businesses that are impacted by these shutdowns. That's a promise I made from the beginning, and it's a promise we're keeping. This isn't the fault of any individual business, and we're going to do everything we can to get them to the other side of this. That's why it was so important last night that our government's bill providing unprecedented levels of supports to Canadian businesses became law. I want to thank all parliamentarians for working together to get this through. These support measures include a new rent subsidy for businesses which will go directly to tenants, not through landlords. Up to 65% of rent can be covered for small businesses affected by COVID-19. And if your business is facing a public health lockdown, then we're also providing an additional 25% rent subsidy through the new lockdown support. Combined with the rent assistance, hard-hit businesses could get a rent subsidy of up to 90%. Canadian businesses can begin applying for these new measures as of Monday, and they will be retroactive until the beginning of October. Lastly, this new law also means that the wage subsidy has been extended until June of next year, securing jobs and support for workers right across the country. This program has been a lifeline for millions of Canadians. So we're making sure people continue to get this support. Go to canada.ca/coronavirus to find out what supports are there to help you. Je tiens à remercier tous les parlementaires d'avoir contribué à l'adoption rapide des nouvelles mesures de soutien aux entreprises proposées par notre gouvernement. Ces mesures comprennent une nouvelle subvention pour le loyer commercial qui sera versée directement aux locataires et non par l'entremise des propriétaires. La subvention pourra couvrir jusqu'à 65% du loyer des petites entreprises touchées par la COVID-19. Et si votre entreprise est visée par un ordre de confinement, vous pourrez recevoir une subvention supplémentaire de 25% pour votre loyer grâce à la nouvelle mesure de soutien en cas de confinement. Ensemble, ces deux mesures pourraient couvrir jusqu'à 90% du loyer des entreprises durement touchées. Ceux qui en ont besoin pourront faire leur demande dès lundi matin. De plus, la subvention salariale sera quant à elle prolongée jusqu'en juin 2020. Pour obtenir de l'information, rendez-vous sur le site web canada.ca/ coronavirus. Just like our government is here to support businesses, we'll also continue to send additional targeted support to areas that are seeing concerning situations with rising cases. Last week, I announced specific support for Indigenous communities in Manitoba. Today, we're providing over $120 million in immediate funding to regions that are affected by outbreaks in Saskatchewan and Alberta. This will be used to support public health measures, food security, and other surge capacity needs. Minister Miller and Dr. Wong will have more to say at their regular update later today, but the bottom line is that we will do everything we can to keep people safe right across the country. À l'heure actuelle, on compte 52 000 cas actifs de COVID-19 au Canada et 1 800 hospitalisations. Plus de 11 000 personnes sont décédées à cause de ce virus. Plus tôt aujourd'hui, la Dr Tam a présenté des projections de ce à quoi on pourrait s'attendre si on ne contrôle pas la propagation actuelle. Si on n'agit pas maintenant, on pourrait compter jusqu'à 20 000 nouveaux cas par jour d'ici la fin décembre. Et si on augmente nos contacts au lieu de les réduire, ce nombre pourrait devenir encore beaucoup plus élevé. Il faut être réaliste. La seule façon de renverser la tendance, c'est de réduire nos contacts en personne. Si vous n'avez pas besoin de quitter votre domicile, restez chez vous. Réduisez vos contacts. Aidez-nous à briser la deuxième vague et à sauver des vies. Earlier today, Dr. Tam presented the updated COVID-19 modeling for Canada. Canada could have up to 20,000 new cases daily by the end of December if we don't limit or reduce our contacts now. And if we loosen and increase our contacts, we could see tens of thousands more. I know this isn't what people wanted to hear, but we have to be realistic about the situation. We're seeing huge spikes in places like Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Nunavut, with a record number of hospitalizations across the country. Overwhelmed hospitals are a problem for people who need COVID-19 care. But it's also an issue for people who need other care, whether it's cancer treatments or emergency surgery. And each new case of COVID-19, every extra week that goes on with more cases, puts added pressure on our frontline workers and our healthcare system workers. Think about it. Our doctors, nurses, personal support workers, orderlies, hospital staff, they've been on the front lines for almost 10 months now, putting in incredibly long hours, being creative in how they can save people and protect people while at the same time trying to keep themselves safe, while at the same time having the same worries that each of us have about our loved ones, about our kids and schools, about our parents and our grandparents. And yet they keep showing up every single day to be there for us, putting their health, their lives, and in many cases their families' lives on the line to keep us safe. And they're tired. They have been heroes. They have been going above and beyond anything they might have thought they were signing up for. We need to help them. We need to give them a break. We need to stop this spike in cases. We need to think about them as we think about our loved ones who need medical help, who are vulnerable to COVID-19. As we think about the damage this is doing to families and to communities across the country. We need to step up now, all of us. The numbers show that right now, more of the most vulnerable Canadians are getting COVID-19, including seniors. And outbreaks in long-term care homes in Indigenous communities are rapidly rising. The only way we can reverse the tide is if we immediately reduce the number of people each of us come into contact with. If you live in a region that is experiencing a surge in cases, stay home if you can and avoid all non-essential travel. To employers who can do so, please make arrangements for your employees to once again work from home. And if you don't need to, don't leave your home. And if you haven't already, join the over 5.3 million Canadians who've already downloaded the COVID Alert app. 5.3 million Canadians. That's over a quarter of all the Canadians in jurisdictions that have used the app who own smartphones. We are on our way to making a difference with this app because every use alerts other people that they need to be careful. And it's an addition to contact tracing of nurses and public health professionals calling up to see who you might have come into contact with. This will catch people you didn't even know you were in contact with. It's an easy thing to do to download the app for free. It's an easy thing to do to take a moment once you receive a COVID-19 positive diagnosis to plug it in. Many provinces give you that code right away as soon as you get your positive case, so please plug it in immediately. Some other places require you to make a phone call, which will take a minute to get the code to plug it into the app. But doing our part with this tool will make a huge difference. And I said that's 25%, over 25% of all people in participating provinces that have the app and have smartphones. Of course, there's 2 provinces that haven't yet made the app available through their healthcare system. I want to directly touch on that right now for people in Alberta and BC. If you live in Alberta and BC, you can already still download the app for free yourself and put it on your phone. And there's 2 reasons to do that right now as we go through this second wave. First reason is I'm still hopeful that the local health systems will put together a system where they can give you that one-time code, which will allow diagnoses in those provinces to be plugged into the system to alert people. But secondly, from the minute you download that app, it starts to work in tracing your contacts with people who also have the app. So if you're in Alberta and you come into contact inadvertently with someone who then goes home to Saskatchewan and gets tested positive, you'll be alerted that you should maybe get yourself checked. It can work even if your health system isn't yet on board. It's free, it absolutely protects your privacy, and it's an extra tool we have at a time where we need to be using all the tools we have to keep ourselves safe. That's what we need to do. Il y a plus de 5 millions de personnes qui ont téléchargé l'application Alerte COVID. Alors j'encourage tout le monde de le faire. Et une fois que vous l'aviez, utilisez-le. Si ça vous avertit que vous aviez été en contact, faites un suivi, isolez-vous, faites-vous tester. Et si vous recevez un diagnostic positif, poinçonnez le code à 8 chiffres pour avertir ceux que vous connaissez et ceux que vous ne connaissez pas qui devraient se faire vérifier eux aussi. C'est gratuit, ça respecte votre vie privée et on a maintenant plus de 25% de la population éligible qui ont des téléphones intelligents qui l'utilisent. C'est un outil de plus et ces jours-ci, on a besoin de tous nos outils pour passer à travers cette pandémie et cette crise. Je compte sur vous tous. So download the app. Help us beat this second wave, save lives, because that's what's at stake. Every person that we lose to this virus is someone who has family and friends who loved them, who had plans for tomorrow and things they still wanted to do. I think about the woman in Toronto who survived the Holocaust and recently passed away from COVID-19. Forced to flee her home during the war, she and her family ended up at a labor camp in Siberia. She made it through and started a new life in Canada. She got married and had kids who loved her dearly. So to her loved ones, my deepest condolences for your loss. And to the thousands of other families who've lost someone because of COVID-19, my thoughts are with you. Every loss is a tragedy, and each story reminds us of what is at stake in this fight against the pandemic. Our parents and grandparents, our friends and neighbors, people who give so much joy to those around them, people who are loved. Je sais que c'est pas facile, mais on doit pouvoir se compter les uns sur les autres. Depuis 10 mois maintenant, nos travailleurs de première ligne dans notre système de santé font un travail extraordinaire pour nous aider. Nos médecins, nos infirmières, tous ceux qui travaillent dans nos hôpitaux, dans notre système de santé, sont là pour nous, travaillent de longues heures, font face à des défis incroyables et imprévus, et font tout ça pendant qu'ils gèrent les mêmes stress que nous tous. Est-ce que je vais tomber malade? Est-ce que je vais ramener cette maladie à mes enfants? Comment est-ce que mes enfants vont passer à travers? Comment est-ce que je vais pouvoir passer à travers? Ces mêmes stress que nous vivons tous, eux, ils vivent en plus de leur responsabilité de nous sauver tous et chacun. Ils se sont dédiés à ça avec leur vie. Ils ont choisi ce parcours, mais il n'y a personne qui a choisi cette pandémie. Et nous devons de faire tout ce qu'on peut faire pour les aider, pour leur donner du répit, pour arrêter cette éclosion des cas. En tant que gouvernement, nous allons continuer d'être là pour vous tous, avec l'aide directe du fédéral pour les travailleurs, pour les familles, pour les entreprises, et ça va continuer. Parce qu'ensemble, on va passer à travers cette crise. Si vous devez rester à la maison, on va être là pour vous. Si vous devez fermer boutique temporairement, on va être là pour vous. On continue d'écouter ces médecins et ces experts et on prend toutes les mesures nécessaires, qu'il soit question d'équipements de protection individuelle ou de vaccins, pour que les Canadiens puissent rester en sécurité. So in the coming days, I will be working from home as much as possible, and I'll be addressing you again from these steps next week. Now is the time for each of us to once again rise to the occasion and do our part. We know what to do. We know how hard it is, but we know it works because we did it this spring. Together, let's bend the curve and keep each other safe. This weekend, I'll be virtually joining the G20 as part of our government's work to respond to this virus at home and abroad. And on that note, today I can also confirm that the Canada-US border restrictions have been extended until at least December 21st. We will continue to work with our American counterparts to keep people safe on both sides of the border. Je peux confirmer que les restrictions à la frontière entre le Canada et les États-Unis seront prolongées jusqu'au 21 décembre. À ce sujet, on continue de travailler avec nos homologues américains pour assurer la sécurité des gens des deux côtés de la frontière. On continue aussi de collaborer avec nos partenaires de partout ailleurs dans le monde, non seulement pour protéger les Canadiens, mais pour rebâtir une économie forte qui fonctionne pour tous. Aujourd'hui, j'ai pris la parole lors de la réunion des dirigeants de l'APEC et j'ai discuté de notre réponse à la pandémie, de la nécessité de rebâtir des économies résilientes et du travail qu'on fait pour lutter contre les changements climatiques. Cette fin de semaine, je vais m'entretenir avec les autres dirigeants du G20 pour parler de notre lutte commune contre la COVID-19 et de ce qu'on fait pour protéger les emplois et relancer nos économies. So I've shared a lot of information this morning, but here's the bottom line. We have a long winter ahead. As the weather drives us indoors, we really are in danger of seeing more transmission and far too many more deaths. It'll be tough, but we know what we have to do. Wear a mask, keep your distance, download the app and use it, avoid gatherings of all sizes, and know that together, being there for each other, we will get through this. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions aujourd'hui par le téléphone avec une question et un suivi. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Catherine Lévesque, La Presse canadienne. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. Radio-Canada rapporte ce matin que certains membres de votre caucus seraient mécontents de l'annonce de Québec sur les rassemblements à Noël. Je me demandais si vous faites partie de ces gens mécontents.
Non, pas du tout. Je pense que le premier ministre Legault est en train de faire tout ce qu'il peut pour reconnaître la réalité dans laquelle les gens vivent, pour encourager les gens de faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour limiter leurs contacts cette semaine et dans les semaines à venir, pour peut-être pouvoir avoir un petit moment de répit à Noël qui ne va pas nous causer une autre éclosion massive de la COVID-19. On est encore loin de Noël. Il reste encore beaucoup de semaines d'ici là dans lesquelles nous allons pouvoir prendre les mesures nécessaires pour aplatir la courbe. J'ai confiance dans les Québécois, j'ai confiance dans tous les Canadiens qu'on va faire ce qu'on a besoin de faire pour nos proches, pour nos aînés, pour nos travailleurs de première ligne dans le système de santé. Ça va prendre des efforts concertés dans les semaines à venir, mais je pense qu'on est capable de le faire. I think we need to recognize that there are many weeks still until Christmas, and it's right to give people hope that there might be ways we can gather at Christmas, but so much depends upon what we are doing right now, immediately, to reduce our contacts, to get through these next weeks and see the cases that are right now spiking almost out of control get back under control. We all want to try and have as normal a Christmas as possible, even though a normal Christmas is, quite frankly, right out of the question. But what kinds of limits we have in place and what kinds of permissions public health is going to encourage us to have depends a lot on what we do right now. So in the coming weeks, let's tighten up. Let's be careful. We've done this before. We can do it again. And the premiers and I and mayors and public health officials are all doing our part to support you, to give you the information. We need Canadians to keep doing what they're doing and tighten up.
En sous-question, Mme Lévesque?
Oui, mais en même temps, depuis ce matin et depuis plusieurs semaines, plusieurs mois, vous demandez à ce qu'on réduise les contacts. Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est une bonne idée que les Québécois puissent visiter 10 personnes à la fois pendant 4 jours à Noël?
Comme j'ai dit, on est loin de Noël encore. Et d'ici là, on a raison à espérer que les gens vont faire les bonnes choses, qu'on va voir une réduction des cas qui pourrait permettre à des comportements comme ça, sans voir une autre éclosion des cas. Je sais que les gens sont fatigués, je sais que les gens sont tannés. Mon Dieu que c'est plate, ce COVID-19-là. Mais on sait aussi que si on tient bon dans les prochaines semaines, si on continue à tenir bon pour les prochains mois, on va s'en sortir. Les vaccins s'en viennent. On sait que ça va être encore un hiver difficile, mais on va passer à travers et on va rebâtir un meilleur monde pour tous.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Ryan Tumulty, National Post. Line open.
Sir, I'm wondering from your perspective, what do you think has gone wrong here? Were provinces too quick to ease restrictions, too slow in putting them back in place? Do you think your government bears some of the blame, or is this about individual Canadians and their own choices?
I think, quite frankly, we're seeing a spike right around the world in this second wave. We are seeing places that otherwise had things reasonably under control suddenly see spikes. I think there's probably lots of things contributing to it. There's probably more things all of us could have done differently or should have done. And of course, we're going to learn from all those things. But right now, I'm focused on what I know we can do. I'm seeing provinces, mayors, public health authorities bringing in new rules and tighter restrictions. I'm seeing Canadians willing to once again step up and do their part. As a federal government, we made a promise from the beginning that we would have people's backs throughout this, whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And that's what we're doing. And with these extra supports to businesses, with continued supports to Canadians. We're demonstrating that we will continue to be there, and I know we're going to get through this.
Following up, Ryan?
Yeah, sir, I know you've said previously that many of the decisions around restrictions are in the hands of local governments, provincial governments, but one area that you could have an impact on is interprovincial travel. I know Premier Horgan has asked you to consider putting in restrictions on travel. I'm wondering if that came up when you talked with him on Thursday and if you're prepared to make any moves in that direction.
What I'm doing right now is telling people not to go out if you don't have to, not to travel if you don't have to, that for the coming weeks, we need to flatten this curve. I think that's the message we're hearing from premiers across the country. And I think Canadians are going to listen as well. I think the idea of bringing in the Federal Emergencies Act to shut down the borders and guard those interprovincial borders is not an idea I am even contemplating right now. I know that there are certain regions who have made decisions to protect and to close their own borders. The Atlantic bubble certainly didn't happen because the federal government mandated it. The provinces in the Atlantic stepped up and limited travel in their bubble, and it has worked very, very well, but they didn't need permission or direction from the federal government to do it. They just did what worked for them. Our northern territories have regularly brought in restrictions to protect themselves as well. Provinces have lots of tools at their disposal, and I'm not looking to bring in a federal hammer to try and do things when we've seen provinces be very effective at doing them themselves. But I will add my voice to all those voices across the country, from doctors to premiers to mayors who are saying, let's do what we need to do right now and flatten this curve to get this explosion of cases in the second wave back under control. Je comprends que les gens veulent voir une réduction dans la mobilité des citoyens et c'est ce qu'on est en train d'encourager. Je suis ici aujourd'hui pour dire aux gens, ne sortez pas de chez vous si vous n'en avez pas de besoin, voyagez pas si ce n'est pas nécessaire, si ça vous met à risque, parce qu'on doit tous faire notre part pour limiter l'éclosion de la COVID-19. Et on n'a pas besoin que le gouvernement fédéral vienne amener la loi sur les mesures d'urgence pour empêcher les déplacements. Si les provinces décident d'amener des règles de plus, ils peuvent très bien le faire. On l'a vu d'ailleurs dans les provinces de l'Atlantique qui n'ont pas eu besoin de permission ni de direction du fédéral pour dire non, on va créer une bulle, et ça a très bien fonctionné pour eux. Ils ont pu faire ça. Et la même chose avec nos territoires dans l'Arctique, qui ont amené des restrictions, qui les ont protégés pas mal bien jusqu'à récemment, et ils continuent d'amener des mesures nécessaires. Donc, les premiers ministres des provinces ont toujours les outils pour en faire plus, mais je sais qu'ils sont déjà en train de dire, comme je dis maintenant, que maintenant on est dans un moment pour réduire nos déplacements.
Operator, last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Trudeau. Je vous amène sur un autre sujet. Il y a comme une sorte de cabale sur les réseaux sociaux à propos de vos déclarations sur le Great Reset, la réinitialisation de l'économie. C'est utilisé par des complotistes qui voient une sorte de conspiration mondiale pour pour profiter de la pandémie pour instaurer un ordre mondial. Avez-vous vu passer ça et qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Moi, ma responsabilité, c'est de protéger les Canadiens, de regarder ce qui se passe maintenant avec la pandémie et essayer d'aider le plus de gens possible à passer à travers, à essayer de créer une économie plus forte et plus résiliente à travers cette pandémie. On a vu très clairement que dans cette pandémie, les plus vulnérables ont été frappés plus fort que d'autres. Les gens marginalisés, les gens racialisés, les femmes. Oui, on a besoin d'ajuster nos programmes et nos politiques pour mieux aider tout le monde. Je pense que c'est ce à quoi les Canadiens s'attendent. C'est certainement ce sur quoi on travaille depuis 5 ans en tant que gouvernement, de créer plus d'opportunités, plus d'égalité, moins de barrières pour tous dans la société. On sait aussi que nous devons en faire plus pendant cette crise de la pandémie et après cette crise de la pandémie, sur la crise de lutter contre les changements climatiques. Effectivement, il va falloir qu'on améliore la façon qu'on fonctionne en tant que société, en tant qu'économie, en tant que pays, qu'on réduise nos émissions de carbone, qu'on cherche des nouvelles alternatives. Je pense qu'une crise comme ça, oui, c'est un moment pour réfléchir à comment on peut bâtir un monde encore meilleur que celui qu'on a hérité de nos parents. C'est toujours ce que je fais, c'est toujours ce que je ferai. I think one of the things this pandemic has shown is that we have gaps in our social safety net, in our society. The most vulnerable who've consistently slipped through those cracks have been even harder hit by this pandemic, and we do need to make changes to strengthen our social safety net, to support workers and families even better, to make sure that as the world changes through this pandemic and beyond, we're there to help people succeed. And looking at how we can improve things, how we can bring in better supports, how we can create better prosperity and shared economic growth for everyone, these are the things that Canadians expect us to do, not just during a pandemic, but have watched us work on for 5 years. Over the first 4 years of our government, we lifted 1 million people out of poverty. We created 1 million new jobs in Canada, which was a record. We did that by leaning in on supporting people who are more vulnerable. And even as we deal with this crisis of a pandemic, we have to continue to deal with the crisis of climate change and the transformations we need to bring to our economy to better be positioned for the future opportunities and the future challenges. And that's working with our energy sector to lower our carbon emissions. It means working with our transformation sector and bringing in investments like the Oakville plant that's going to be zero emission vehicles. We're going to continue to do the kinds of things that Canadians expect us to do, which is work every day to make sure we're leaving a better world to our kids than the one we inherited from our parents.
En suivi, Hélène?
Oui, mais qu'est-ce que vous dites à ceux, incluant des députés à la Chambre des communes, qui voient dans votre utilisation du mot Great Reset une preuve d'une sorte de complot? Qu'est-ce que vous répondez à ça? Ça semble prendre de l'ampleur sur les réseaux sociaux, cette théorie complotiste.
Je pense qu'on est dans un moment d'anxiété pour beaucoup de gens. Des gens qui sont frustrés par cette pandémie, par l'impact injuste que ça a sur leur vie. Et à travers le monde, les gens cherchent des raisons et des solutions qui, des fois, sont des théories du complot. Mais si y a des députés conservateurs qui veulent se concentrer sur des conspirations et des théories du complot, ils peuvent, évidemment. Nous, on va rester concentrés sur les Canadiens. I think we're in a time of anxiety where people are looking for reasons for things that are happening to them, that the difficult moments we're in. It's nice to be able to try and find someone to blame, something to point to, something to get mad at. I think we're seeing a lot of people fall prey to disinformation. And if Conservative MPs and others want to start talking about conspiracy theories, well, that's their choice. I'm going to stay focused on helping Canadians get through this, on learning lessons from this pandemic, and making sure that the world we leave to our kids is even better than the world we inherited from our parents.
Hello, Prime Minister. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. In your speech, you said, quote, going into lockdown and supporting businesses while we're in that lockdown is a better way of ensuring their success in a few months, in a few years, than trying to tough through a virus that is running around unchecked. Are you now recommending a nationwide lockdown like we had in the spring?
No, I'm not. I am today using my voice and my position as Prime Minister to talk to all Canadians, to tell them that we're in a serious situation where they need to listen to their premiers, they need to listen to their public health experts on what they can do in their jurisdictions to do more. And while I say that, I also am reminding people of the federal government's promise to people that we would have your backs. And we've done that from the beginning with the CERB and now with EI. We've done that with wage supports for businesses, with small business loans, with measures like the rent subsidy that have helped and will continue to help businesses hang on and get through this situation that isn't their fault, but is hitting them hard. Our ability to hang on together and get through this relies on all of us working together, and that's exactly what I'm calling for.
So why did you reference specifically going into lockdown then as a way to help sort of support businesses?
Well, we put forward a measure that is the commercial rent support and subsidy that goes directly to tenants, not through landlords this time. And there's an additional 25% top-up that's called the lockdown top-up, that if you are under a local public health order that says you need to shut down for public health rules, we're going to give you an extra 25% support towards your rent. Because this is a reality that many provinces are bringing in restrictions, bringing in lockdowns, and wherever they are across the country, as a federal government, we will be there to give you that extra support, but also to reassure the people making those decisions about restrictions and lockdowns that if they make that decision that this community or this sector needs to shut down, the federal government will be there, as we have since the beginning, to support those communities, those individuals, those small businesses. Okay. Je pense que les gens doivent savoir que nous sommes là en tant que gouvernement fédéral pour aider dans les décisions des provinces. Les décisions que différents secteurs, différentes juridictions sont en train de faire pour amener des fermetures, pour limiter des activités qui peuvent être faites, c'est leur décision et c'est approprié que c'est des décisions qui soient prises à un niveau plus local. C'est pas une approche qui va aider à travers le pays. On voit des différences à travers le pays. C'est pour ça que mon rôle en tant que Premier ministre, c'est de dire et de rappeler aux gens qu'on va être là pour vous. On va être là pour vous aider, incluant avec des appuis extra si vous êtes dans un endroit ou dans un secteur ou dans une localité qui doit fermer à cause d'ordre de santé publique. Parce que nous savons que de prendre les décisions difficiles mais essentielles pour réduire les contacts, c'est la seule façon de passer à travers cette pandémie.
Bonjour, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada. Monsieur Trudeau, vous avez montré dans votre déclaration tout à l'heure que vous êtes quand même frustré en voyant qu'il y a des travailleurs de la santé qui ont fait autant de sacrifices et là, on se retrouve avec des chiffres qui augmentent. On imagine que leur stress augmente à eux aussi. Alors, dans ce contexte-là, je comprends que vous voulez donner un peu d'espoir aux Canadiens avec les fêtes qui s'en viennent, mais si on permet les rassemblements pendant les fêtes comme on le fait au Québec, est-ce que vous ne croyez pas qu'il y a un risque là, justement, de mettre beaucoup de pression sur ces travailleurs de la santé qui ont déjà contribué et aussi, vous-même, qu'est-ce que vous allez faire aux fêtes, M. Trudeau?
Depuis les débuts, je souligne que ma job, c'est pas de juger ou de critiquer les provinces, c'est de travailler avec eux. Et je serai là et nous serons là en tant que gouvernement fédéral pour livrer de l'aide directe aux citoyens à travers le pays, aux entreprises à travers le pays. C'est ce qu'on peut faire. On va aussi être là pour appuyer les provinces et aider les provinces avec leurs décisions. On a envoyé 25 milliards de dollars aux provinces pour le dépistage, pour la recherche des contacts, pour l'équipement de protection individuelle, pour l'aide aux plus vulnérables, pour une rentrée scolaire plus sécuritaire pour nos enfants. On va continuer d'être là pour travailler avec les enfants et avec les provinces. Et je sais que nous allons continuer de prendre les bonnes décisions ensemble. Donc, les semaines à venir vont réellement déterminer ce qu'on pourrait voir à Noël comme règle à travers le pays. Et c'est pour ça que c'est tellement important de pouvoir resserrer tout ce qu'on est en train de faire dans les mois à venir et dans les semaines à venir. par rapport à nous, la réflexion est que Noël, cette année, va être beaucoup d'appels téléphoniques, beaucoup de FaceTime et de Zoom avec les amis. Je vais être avec la famille ici au lac Mousseau, mais il n'y a pas de plan plus que ça. On va restreindre notre bulle et essayer de prendre un petit moment de répit et célébrer la fin de cette année assez plate. Merci.
Hi, Prime Minister Tom Perry, CBC. Do you think that part of the problem here is mixed messaging, and that you're saying don't go out unless you have to, but some gyms are open, some stores are open, so there's a mixed message there? Or do you think that some people have just tuned out and just gotten tired of this?
I think a lot of people are tired of this. I think a lot of people are just wanting this to be done with, wanting to be through it. And I think the arrival of imminent vaccines on the horizon is both motivating people to say, okay, we're almost there, and others to say, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm just going to wait. We need to hang in there. We need to know that the end is in sight, but we're not there yet. We still got to get over this hump of a winter that's going to drive us inside, endanger us to more spikes and more transmission, and really hang in there. And I know it was somewhat simpler in the spring when I could stand in this place and say, everybody across the country, stay home, don't go out. And it worked to bend that curve. But millions of Canadians suffered. And it was a blunt object of a tool, a national shutdown, that we now know actually we're seeing different jurisdictions in different provinces use targeted shutdowns and targeted reductions in a much better way. The idea for parents of having to deal with kids at home once again if schools shut down is something that obviously everyone's trying to avoid. But in order to avoid that, we need to make careful choices appropriate for every situation, every jurisdiction about how to limit things. And that means that, your friend who you talk to who lives in a different city may have very different choices that they can engage in that you can't. And that seems unfair and it seems frustrating, and it is. It's unfair and it's frustrating. Yep. There's no question about it. But we're not in a fair situation. And all we can do is try and be there for each other as best we can. As a federal government, we're trying to make it as fair as possible for people by being there for the people who need more help. We're giving more help to businesses who are forced to shut down, more help for businesses that are really suffering, while others are being able to make it through. But everyone is sick and tired of this. And we need to know that the end is in sight, that spring will come after this winter. But in order to get through this winter without overwhelming our health systems, without losing too many more of our loved ones, we need to do one last big effort these coming months, and it starts with the coming weeks of really tightening up, which is why I'm back here in front of my house telling you it's time. It's time to tighten up. Je pense que je comprends que les gens sont fatigués. On est dans une situation frustrante et injuste. Injuste quand on parle à des amis dans un autre endroit qui ont moins de règles que nous. Injuste quand on voit des gens qui ne sont pas en train de suivre les règles, qui continuent leur vie comme normal, quand nous, on se limite dans nos contacts. Il y a plein de choses injustes dans cette pandémie. C'est pour ça que le gouvernement fédéral est là pour essayer d'être là pour les plus vulnérables, pour aider ceux qui sont heurtés plus par ça. Mais on est tous en train de faire des sacrifices, on est tous en train de souffrir et nous devons tous faire notre part. On fait face à un hiver qui va être difficile, mais le printemps s'en vient. Les vaccins s'en viennent. On doit tenir bon pour les prochaines semaines, pour les prochains mois. On doit faire notre part. On va pouvoir passer à travers, mais nous devons de se resserrer.
Good afternoon. Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. that you have an urgency and a certain tone to your messaging today that doesn't seem to be being picked up by opposition parties who keep attacking the government's response. And at the same time, you continue to attack them, including just now accusing the Conservatives of peddling in conspiracy theories. Do you think that there's a risk to that approach in undermining the entire message and having people tune you out?
I think we've seen Canadians work together across political parties, across jurisdictions, as we've worked hand in hand with premiers of all different provinces in moving forward to support Canadians, and we will continue to. I think it's really important that our democracy continues to function well, that Parliament continues to sit, that opposition parties continue to criticize the government every step of the way. That's how our system works, and that's how it should work, because the government needs to be on its toes every time. It needs to think about the fact that it's going to be criticized for everything it does, and therefore we better do it as best we possibly can. That's the way our system works, and it's just fine. And for example, it showed that we can come together as we did to pass this legislation that just got royal assent that is going to send more help to businesses. We all come together as we need to. But it's also a time where, as a government, even as we are engaging with opposition parties, our focus is not on politics. Our focus is on Canadians. Our focus is on being there to support people. And if the opposition parties want to dive down rabbit holes, well, they get to do that. But where they want to work with us to deliver for Canadians, to say, well, can you do this more for Canadians? Maybe you can come and help this group this way. We're working with them. We're happy to work with them. We're happy to do more. We're happy to be pressed by them to do more. Because that's how this system is supposed to work. So yes, it can be frustrating to Canadians to see politicians, taking jabs at each other every now and then, but they also need to know that we are working together when it matters. And they can make their judgments around whether someone's going too far with an elbow here or there, or a critique here and there, or whether or not we're actually doing the things that matter. And we're a democracy, so people ultimately get to decide how they move forward.
David Aiken, Global News, Prime Minister. I got the app on my phone. I know you get it on your phone. The federal government could do a whole lot to compel people to have it on their phone. For example, I wonder if you've considered any of these. All federal government employees, if you've got a government smartphone, you're going to have the app on. All federally regulated industries, airlines, banks, if they own a smartphone and give it to employees, it's got to be on here. The CRTC tells us what can and cannot be carried on TVs. What about telling telecom carriers? Every new phone you sell out of the box has the alert pre-installed and the default is active. Have you considered some of those measures?
We have, and they are measures we are continuing to consider. We've seen a number of companies step up and promote utilization of the apps. Delivery companies saying all of our drivers will have the app, so you should have it too. There's lots of messaging we have. One of the core elements, though, is we want people to feel like they have ownership and agency over their decisions. I mean, there's so little that people can do in a pandemic, or seemingly it's this global thing that is so much bigger than us, that having things that you can actually choose to do and make the right decision to do and help each other out is very powerful. We don't want to order people to have it. We know Canadians want to do the right thing, which is why it is really important for me that it be voluntary. It protects the privacy to a greater degree than some health experts would like. They'd love to know who you contacted so they could communicate with them. They'd love to know where you were in order to see better what kind of case spread is happening. But we made the decision that protecting people's privacy and getting more people to use it was the right decision. So it absolutely protects your privacy. It's totally voluntary. And it does rely a lot on people wanting to do the right thing. But this is Canada. We've seen it time and time again as neighbors step up to help neighbors, as people choose to do the right thing, as people choose to help each other out. And keeping this app voluntary and entrusting Canadians with the responsibility of doing their part to help people is also a very important measure, even as I continue to say every time I get a chance, download the app. Use the app. Plug in your code if you get a positive test. Get yourself checked. if you get a notification. These are the things that we can do to help prevent this terrible pandemic.
Thank you, Prime Minister. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.